Well, welcome back. Now, various commentators in the legal sphere have hailed yesterday's Constitutional Court decision to sentence former President Jacob Zuma as a clear reminder to all South Africans that nobody is above the law. The court has sentenced former President to 15 months in jail for contempt of court, and this was after the country's apex court had earlier directed former President Zuma to appear before the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, a directive that the former president did not adhere to. Zuma has been ordered to submit himself to the South African Police Service either at Nkandla Police Station or Johannesburg Central Police Station within 5 calendar days from the date of the court's ruling. So for further in-depth legal analysis of this historic judgment, we joined by Dr. James Grant, practicing advocate of the High Court, and Ulrich Roux, who is a managing director of Ulrich Roux and Associates. Gentlemen, good morning, and thanks to both of you for joining us.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Good morning to you as well.
Dr. Grant, let me start with you. The Jacob Zuma Foundation, in reaction, they described the judgment as shocking and unconstitutional. And it begs the question, and one that you will help us unpack, as to whether the Constitutional Court did in fact go to great lengths to safeguard Mr. Zuma's rights, and whether he's been treated unfairly, as the foundation would assert.
Ulrich, you want to take that?
Yes, certainly. I think, if one had regard to the judgment handed down yesterday, it was clear that the court went to great lengths to try and protect Mr. Zuma's constitutional rights. It is obviously one of our supreme constitutional rights, and that is the right to freedom and to liberty. So to take away a person's liberty and his freedom, as the court has ordered for Jacob Zuma to serve 15 months in prison, it is certainly a very serious step that the court has taken. But if one had proper regard to the judgment, the court tried every avenue to avoid Mr. Zuma having to go to jail. But fact of the matter is that he basically left the court with no option but to send him to jail, in my opinion. He was granted numerous opportunities to adhere to a constitutional court order. He chose to ignore the order. He chose to act in defiance of the order, and he went one step further than that. He addressed a personal letter to the outgoing Chief Justice, Mr. Mogoeng, in which he attacked the Constitutional Court. He likened it to the old apartheid regime, and he criticized the order that the court had made. So, the Constitutional Court is the highest court in our country, and if this court did not stand up for our Constitution and for what is enshrined in our Constitution, then, it would have rendered the court toothless. So I think the right decision had been made. All Zuma's constitutional rights had been taken into account, and he basically left the court with no option but to take away his liberty and to send him to a period of 15 months imprisonment.
And just to take that point slightly further, Dr. Grant, in terms of what Ulrich has just explained, and the court obviously going on to say in the main judgment that former president was no ordinary litigant, and that also that there was heightened obligation on the former president to conduct himself in a manner that accords with the Constitution. So let's just speak to that a little bit in terms of all of us, every citizen in this country being equal before the law, but why there is a higher expectation on someone who would have been or is the president of this country.
Certainly. So there are two main tenets to the judgment, really. The one is that no one is above the law. The second is the critical value of the rule of law, which is what ultimately the entire judgment sought to protect and took great umbrage at in respect of the conduct of Mr. Zuma. What we heard also from the Constitutional Court is that while no one is above the law, Mr. Zuma is not just any citizen. He's in fact a former president who's twice taken the oath to protect the Constitution, and therefore he must be held to an even higher standard. And for that reason, the court believed that it would be inappropriate not to impose a sentence on him of an unsuspended term of imprisonment.
So if we can, Ulrich, now just take a look at both the main judgment and the second judgment and the points of convergence and divergence.
Yes, so there was a minority judgment. 2 of the 11 judges was not in agreement with sending Mr. Zuma to a period of imprisonment, although all the judges were unanimous in finding that he was in contempt of the Constitutional Court order. We often see this. It is very seldom that there is a unanimous judgment where all the judges are in agreement. But in this instance, the majority, 9 out of the 11 judges, agreeing that a period of unsuspended imprisonment had to be imposed. So the majority judgment is the judgment that is published, and it is the judgment that is not appealable and cannot be taken on review. Once again, as I said before, the Constitutional Court is the highest court in our country, and from a legal perspective, this would be regarded as the end of the line for Mr. Zuma.
And in terms of the divergent views in the 2 judgments with regard to, for example, as they put it in that judgment, depriving a contemner of liberty without a criminal trial. Let's speak to that briefly, Ulrich.
Well, remember that in contempt proceedings, it is always twofold in the sense that it is always a civil application in nature. So it is a court order that a person needs to adhere to. And if he does not adhere to that court order, in this instance, it was a constitutional court order which ordered Jacob Zuma to present himself for testimony at the Zondo Commission. He chose to ignore that, and a contempt application was launched against him. That is civil in nature. Where the criminal element comes in with contempt of court proceedings is where a punishment needs to be handed down for a person who is found to be in contempt of a court order. Now, in this instance, the court found that he was in willful contempt of a court order. So in other words, he deliberately defied the court order. He acted in a malafide manner, which is of bad moral character, and deliberately defied that order not to present himself and not to adhere to the Constitutional Court order. And that is where the criminal element came in. If he had been found to not have acted in a malafide manner and deliberately defied the order, then he most likely would have escaped a sentence of imprisonment, and it most likely would have been a period of a suspended sentence, giving him an opportunity to present himself and to adhere to the Constitutional Court order. But as I said before, the fact that he was granted numerous opportunities and then he chose to defy the court order even further by addressing a letter to the Constitutional Court saying that he would become a prisoner of the court and that he did not agree with the court order, that showed that he acted in complete defiance and in willful defiance of the court order. And that is where the majority judges found that there is simply no other option but to send him to a period of imprisonment. Weighing up his constitutional rights to liberty and to freedom, it simply left him with no choice, given the fact that he had been granted so many opportunities. The 2 judges who were not in agreement with the majority found differently. They found that the constitutional right to liberty and to freedom was still supreme and that he should have been granted another opportunity. In other words, the period of imprisonment should have been suspended. But once again, you will in most cases sit with a majority judgment and a minority judgment. And in this instance, obviously the Jacob Zuma Foundation have already indicated that they are not in agreement and that they agree with a minority. It is a mere fact of law that the majority judgment is the judgment that needs to be followed. So, it's very seldom that 11 judges in a constitutional court are going to find exactly the same on numerous points of law in an application before them.
And Dr. Grant, just speaking to that, and of course the unsuspended sentence, this of course a point of divergence in the two judgments, the constitutionality of this whole matter in that regard. What's your view on that, given that the minority judgment, I think, pointed out that there was no precedent, in case law for this unsuspended sentence. So please talk to us about that.
The minority judgment placed greater emphasis on fair trial rights and took the view that because this invokes an element of criminal law, that the fair trial rights which are afforded to a criminal accused ought to have been observed in respect of Mr. Zuma. Although perhaps if not technically so, then certainly in virtue of the spirit of those rights. And therefore they were of the view that either a compelling order which was suspended ought to have been imposed in the sense that he should have again been ordered to present himself and given another opportunity to testify before the commission, with a condition attached that if indeed he did not attend, that he would then be imprisoned. The majority countered that view by saying, as Ulrich has already said, he's been given so many opportunities that in the view of the majority, there's just no point in giving him any further opportunities at all. And therefore the majority felt that this is the end of the road. He must receive an unsuspended direct term of imprisonment.
So looking at what came out of this overall, what are the constitutional and perhaps democratic implications of this judgment for us as a country going forward, Ulrich?
Well, this is, to my knowledge, the first time that the Constitutional Court has actually sent someone to an unsuspended period of imprisonment for being in contempt of a court order. So it is definitely, a new precedent that has been set by the court today, and a landmark ruling in that regard. But I think that when one looks at democracy and everyone's equal rights before the law and especially before the Constitutional Court, I think that the law has been upheld in its entirety in this matter. There was simply, and I'm repeating myself ad nauseum here, but there was simply no other choice for the court but to send Jacob Zuma to a period of imprisonment. And I think that they would have done the same had it been any other citizen in South Africa. And that is the important thing, that everyone is treated equally before the law. He was given ample opportunities. He was given a fair and numerous opportunities to adhere to a court order, and he willfully defied it. And the right finding was made, in my opinion, by the court as well as the right sentence.
And of course, for the commission and looking at the work going on there, and incidentally, I saw many people asking yesterday, Dr. Grant, what does this mean for the commission? Is this the end of the road for the former president in terms of his appearance at the commission? But this is exactly why we find ourselves here, because he had defied the commission. But just in terms of some of the commission's other work, a civil case judgment, there was a criminal case that was laid by the commission, if I remember correctly, against the former president. So how does that impact, that case, for example?
Well, that charge under the Commissions Act is a charge of being in contempt of a ruling of the Commission by virtue of him failing to appear and failing to give testimony and to remain in attendance. The Commissions Act provides for what might be called contempt proceedings under the Commissions Act, where there is a limitation of 6 months in prison for someone held to be in breach of that. That charge was laid with the National Prosecuting Authority, and that charge no doubt will be proceeded with, and if found guilty of that, Mr. Zuma could find himself serving an additional 6 months for that. Technically speaking, the Commission could continue to invite Mr. Zuma and could continue, if Mr. Zuma fails to appear, the Commission could continue to lay such charges. I don't see them doing that. I believe that it's now quite clear to everyone, including the Commission, that Mr. Zuma will not testify, and it's unfortunate both that society will lose his insights, but it's also, in my view, unfortunate that Mr. Zuma has lost the opportunity to share his side of the story. Going forward for other witnesses, this is a very strong message to any other witness who might seek to defy the authority of the Commission, that if they are summoned to give testimony, they need to think very carefully before they refuse.
And your parting shot?
I may add on to that, Lebo. So, he's now going to, within 5 days, he needs to hand himself over to the South African Police Services, and they must arrest him and incarcerate him. If he does not do so, then the court order made it clear that the Minister of Police and the Police Commissioner must use whatever means possible in order to take him into custody and to incarcerate him. That means that he will now start serving his period of imprisonment, and he will effectively be under the control of the Department of Correctional Services. He obviously, and this was a question that was raised many times yesterday as well, he obviously still has the pending corruption trial in the Pietermaritzburg High Court. The fact that he's now been sentenced to a period of imprisonment will not affect that trial. In fact, the Department of Correctional Services will now have a duty to transport him in custody to that trial, where he will still continue to appear for all the appearances going forward. But I agree with Dr. Grant. It is he was going to testify at the Zondo Commission in a manner which would not have implicated him in any criminal sanction. In other words, he could not have been criminally liable as such. But it was more to do with the 9 years that he served as his term as President of South Africa, and to provide the Commission with insight into those 9 years. And it is a loss for the country as well as for Jacob Zuma himself that he completely defied this Commission that was launched whilst he was still the president of the country. Because he could have provided so much insight into his term of imprisonment, and yet now the country and the Commission is definitely poorer for that because of his defiance. I do, however, think that they will continue to try and bring him before the Commission. Remember that they need to issue a subpoena or a summons again for him to appear. As I said, he will now be under the control of the Department of Correctional Services, so one can only wait and see what does transpire, and whether he doesn't have a change of heart to decide to testify in front of the Commission. But only time will tell.
Well, interesting point on which to leave it, and indeed we shall see. Time will tell as to what the Commission does and how it plays out. But thank you so much for your time this morning, Dr. James Grant, practicing advocate of the High Court, and Ulrich Roux, managing director of Ulrich Roux Associates, talking to us about the Constitutional Court judgment sentencing former President Jacob Zuma to an unsuspended 15 months in prison. And we're also pulsing you on that on our question of the day, asking you for your reaction at Morning Live SABC. Time now for your news at 7.